Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today I want to talk to you about missing some of your child's anxiety or OCD struggles. And really the ultimate goal is to help you be a better detective, not paranoid. We'll talk about that today. I don't want you to be paranoid and think everything's anxiety or OCD. But a lot of times we think we know everything because our kids are maybe being expressive or they're in therapy. And more often than not, we are missing some things. And I want to talk about why that may be, how to notice it, and then what to do when you do discover it. But before we get started, I do want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. You can schedule a free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is a right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That's treatmyocd.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes as well. I also want to mention that if you're looking for in-depth support that goes much further than my podcast, definitely check out my online school at atparentingsurvivalschool.com. I have been very busy in the last 5-6 years churning out on-demand courses so that you can be as smart as any anxiety and OCD therapist. Educate yourself, give the tools to your kids directly, and I actually have now new courses. I have an OCD course for kids and teens where we can also give them the tools directly. So check that out at atparentingsurvivalschool.com. All right, let's get into this today. So this topic came up because of something that I missed that happened yesterday. And I love to do things. I love to pick topics that happen to all of us. And having 3 kids with anxiety or OCD, I feel like I have an endless amount of resources and experiences because they all have different issues. And so something always pops up every single week. But often I work with kids in my practice. I worked with kids in my practice, and there were so many things that I didn't know, that I had to discover over time, that they were even struggling with and kept secret from their therapist, myself, or things that the parents didn't know that I educated the parents on. And that's not unique. Unfortunately, that is actually incredibly common, that we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg when it comes to our kids' anxiety or OCD. Now, that doesn't mean that we should spin our wheels and get really anxious and feel overwhelmed, because that is a big reason why I teach parents in my online courses and in my online community at AT Parenting Community to be able to empower our kids to help themselves. Because no matter what, we will never know 100% of their internal struggles. We just won't. Think about it. Is there a person in your world that knows 100% of your thoughts? Probably not. And if you have a partner, maybe they know 98%, and that's really good if that's happening. But we do have our private struggles, our private thoughts. And when you add anxiety and OCD to the mix, you're going to increase that percentage, or decrease it actually, in how I'm saying it. But that's normal. And a lot of times I think we try to micromanage our kids' anxiety or OCD in that we own it. We own it completely. And we feel like we have to stay on top of everything because we have to stop the compulsions. And in reality, we will never know what's going on. They can do mental compulsions, and you can't stop mental compulsions. You can't even really stop physical compulsions unless they involve you. I don't recommend physically going over there and disrupting and stopping someone from doing a compulsion, because that's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. It's not going to stop the problem. It's just hurting trust and communication. And that is really at the heart of everything, is we want our kids to have open communication, and the way to get that is through a deep level of trust. So it's a slippery slope. It's a minefield. It's really challenging to parent kids with anxiety or OCD because we have to constantly gauge our responses and not be over micromanaging, but we also don't want to be complacent. And so it's finding this sweet spot that we are constantly finding and trying to balance every day in this journey. And this is a component of it. I don't necessarily have to know every theme and every compulsion that my child is doing or every anxiety thought they have, but a lot of times it involves me or there's something that's going on. And so in a perfect world, we want to know as much as we possibly can. And the caveat to that is even if you don't, your child, as we gear our kids up for independence and being able to utilize the coping skills that we teach them, it won't matter as much because they'll be doing the hard things. They will know how to resist doing a compulsion, identify new anxiety or OCD themes. They will have all this. I mean, that is my ultimate goal. And that's kind of why I do these courses. And that's why I eventually did a course directly for kids and teens with OCD. I didn't have a course directly for them before. I have one on difficult behavior that is for the parent and for the child and teen, a child or teen, because I have two different videos depending on their age. But I didn't really have any other direct resources. I had a book, Anxiety Sucks, for anxiety, but that book is not for OCD. And now I have an OCD workbook for kids. So I have a lot of resources. But ultimately, we want to teach our kids the foundation of how to crush anxiety or OCD, regardless of theme, regardless of what's going on. But it is really nice if we can be privy to what's happening, especially when it involves us. And more importantly, when it looks like difficult behavior or odd behavior, and they're looking at you to complete a loop. And so that's when it really is important to be able to identify, is this anxiety or OCD? Am I missing something here? Or is this what I think it is? Them being difficult or them being avoidant or them being a kid? Because ultimately, they are kids and teens. They are going to have problems outside of anxiety or OCD, and not everything is anxiety or OCD. Some of our kids can have behavioral issues that are really unrelated. They might be able to manipulate and get what they want when they want it. They might have tantrums until they get what they want. I mean, kids will do what works. And those are issues that we have to deal with as parents as well. We don't get like a free ride on that part because we have to deal with all this other really hard stuff. So let's start with, why do kids hide these struggles, right? Like, why would they hide them? If we have a good relationship and they trust us and we're helping them, why not just say this is my anxiety, or why not just say this is my OCD? And there's a couple of reasons for that that I can think of, and there obviously could be more. One is maybe they don't want to always talk about anxiety or OCD. So they know that if they mention that this is anxiety or OCD, that we're going to have this long conversation about anxiety or OCD, or about don't give in to anxiety or don't give in to OCD or whatever it is. And they don't want the lecture. They might perceive it that way. Another one might be that they're ashamed. It might be embarrassing. There are certain themes and taboo topics, especially around OCD, that are embarrassing. And so they may not want you to know because it's embarrassing. Or maybe they're afraid of something that they feel is childish. They're afraid of, separating from you, and they feel like they're too old to have that fear. Or they're afraid of being in the dark and they feel like they're too old. Or whatever else might make them feel ashamed. And so feeling ashamed can be a really powerful tool to keep our kids quiet. Another one is, anxiety or OCD might tell them to be quiet. A lot of times part of the disorder or disorders is to say, if you talk about it, it's going to make it worse. And so they don't want to talk about it. Sometimes OCD will say, if you talk about it, they're going to make you not give in to the compulsion. And you really want to do these compulsions. So it's much better that they think that this is difficult behavior or laziness or obnoxiousness or whatever we're going to label it, versus this is a compulsion, Because if you're labeling it a compulsion, now I got to work on it. Now you're going to like focus on it and it's going to be a pain in my butt. So that might be a reason too. And these are not, these are not exhaustive. And also kids can have multiple reasons why, and they might be a couple of these. Another one is they may really want us to accommodate. And so if we don't know it's anxiety, we might think that they're bored and they don't really want to go and they're just not into it. Why am I going to spend the money doing this if they're just not into it? Or, oh, they want it in that way because they like it and it's a habit or it's a routine. Okay, well, why am I going to bother with that? Or they want me to answer this. Okay, I'll just answer this, right? Reassurance seeking or information seeking. If we're not thinking it's anxiety or OCD, we're just answering it like a typical parent. We might be involved in it. There might be something that we're doing in the loop and we're not aware. And so they're not going to let us know that it's anxiety or OCD because they don't want us to remove that compulsion. So there's a whole bunch of reasons just there on why that can happen. So I'm going to give you some examples of what this can look like from my own life. I was just trying to think of some recent examples. This happens to everybody. It doesn't matter about your expertise or your knowledge or how well versed you are in anxiety or OCD. I feel like I'm hopefully incredibly versed in childhood anxiety and OCD. I live it. I breathe it. It's my job. It's my mom profession, my career profession. It's everything. I have my own anxiety issues. It runs in my family. It's everywhere. And I still miss things. I still miss things. And that's because we're all human and our kids are good at concealing things and we may not catch everything. It's literally impossible. And so instead of thinking that you're going to catch everything, you want to have an awareness that you may not know everything and a curiosity of wanting to understand behaviors that don't make sense to you. And it'll be clearer when I give you some examples of what I'm talking about. The first thing yesterday, well, let me back up. So my son was diagnosed with ADHD a few months ago at this time. And I started reading this book. Once he got diagnosed, I was looking at everything from a different lens. All of a sudden, I was looking at all of his behaviors that I had either labeled difficult or labeled anxiety or OCD. Most of it was labeled anxiety or OCD because I didn't think he was necessarily difficult. I thought he was just dysregulated and sometimes triggered by his anxiety or OCD. And so the last few months, I've just been like reevaluating a lot of my perceptions of the origin of the problem and his behaviors. Anyway, so the psychologist that I was working with on having him diagnosed recommended the book Smart But Scattered by Peg Dawson, which was an older book. Ironically, I just went to look it up for you because I have the worst memory in the world. So that's why I'm always nervous when I'm on podcasts and they say, what are your favorite books or whatever? Like I never remember the authors' names. The OCD workbooks I remember because, it's eat, live, and breathe that. But I have a terrible memory. So I was looking up the author's name and what pulled up was Smart But Scattered Teens. And I was like, when did this book come out? Because maybe I want to read it. I'll have to look into, because the Smart But Scattered book by Peg Dawson was for kids under 12 and under, and he's 14. And a lot of it was very, very, very basic for me. And so I found it interesting. Yeah, that came out in 2012. I wonder when her other one came out. Should not do this when you're recording a podcast. That one came out in 2012. So I don't know how old the other one is. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I should have listened to the other one. I always listen to audiobooks. I'm an audio digester. So I kind of gave up on the book halfway through. But for those of you that do have kids with ADHD, 12 and under, it might be a helpful book. It is a bit dry and boring, to be honest. But she did give some good concrete things on how to help with executive functioning and looking at your own behaviors. It was actually a pretty interesting book. It was just very dry and it was very repetitive in the audio version. But I'm going to check out the teen one. Maybe it's better. Anyway, the reason why I'm telling you this is because I noticed that I'm always yelling at him. He's gotten to the age where I'm like, I could actually go to bed while he's still awake. I always had this thing that I couldn't go to bed until like the whole house was asleep. I don't know why I had that thought. I think part of it might have been my own childhood struggles where like we had I had a very dysfunctional childhood, and there was no tuck in. There was no, like, the house is being wrapped up. It was just kind of like I would collapse, like, and on the couch or in my bed or wherever. And like, that's where I slept. And so there was no order or structure. So I think to overcompensate, may not be over, but to compensate, I've always had some structure in my house of, there's a bedtime, there's a tuck in, and then I go to bed. And recently, as they're getting older, I'm like, I can let go of that. It's the summer, they're going to stay up past me, and that's okay. But what's been happening is that my son, I'll still be like, you have to go to bed by 11. And then if he goes to bed at 1, then the next day he has to go to bed at 10. Like, there's this constant, like, here's some freedom. Oh, you couldn't handle it. Let me take it back. Total side note. That would be a good podcast topic. How to empower our kids for independence. One small step. It's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, constantly. But the thing that annoyed me was that he would come down for a snack or something late at night, like, or before he would go to bed, and all the kitchen lights would be on. So I'd wake up and all the kitchen lights are on. And we have, like, I don't know what you call it, can lighting, like recess lighting. In the walls, like on the ceiling. And so it's a lot of lights. I guess that's my whole point. There's probably about 6 lights. And then we were in Hawaii, like last summer, 2 summers ago. And I bought these really cool, like, glass jellyfish lights. And it was so hard to install. I had someone come out and help me install them. But the light bulb is stuck inside of those, like, jellyfish. It's super cool looking. But I know that once those light bulbs go out, I'll have to hire someone to take the whole thing apart to get back to the light bulb. So I've been only using those lights when I really want some ambiance. And so when I see those lights on top of it, because there's 3 of them, they're kind of like over the bar, I'm like, argh. And so I've been approaching it like it's laziness, it's disrespectful, he just doesn't care. And so I would constantly be like, you left the lights on, like, you can't stay up late if you're going to leave the lights on. Like, how can you forget? They're, like, right there. Can't you tell? Then he gets this diagnosis, and I'm looking at it from a different lens, and I'm like, okay, he just can't remember. And in Smart But Scattered, she talks a lot about scaffolding, like really obvious things that I should know as a therapist, that I do know as a therapist, but I never apply it. I never really applied it to him, because I always looked at his behavior just through the lens of anxiety and OCD. So the book taught me you can't just set an expectation and then be like, okay, you're going to do it. I set the expectation. There has to be, like, a baby step. So I was like, aha, I'll write a note in a big Sharpie and I will put that piece of paper where he sits at night. And so he doesn't get, like, it's not there all the time, so he doesn't, like, become blind to it. I'll just put it there when I really want him, when I know he's going to be up after me. So I thought this was brilliant. And so I'm putting these notes down, like, when he's staying up after me, and I wake up and the lights are still on. And I'm like, well, this is stupid. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. I mean, how can you, like, ignore a big Sharpie notice that says, turn the lights off, please? So yesterday, he wanted to stay up after me. And so lately I've just been staying up until he goes to bed, because I just want to make sure that the house is, like, kind of all turned off and shut down. And so I'm like, I'm so tired. You have to go to bed. He's like, no, I just want to stay up. And I'm like, no, because when you stay up, you always leave the lights on. And I've left big notes for you because I understand that you have ADHD and you ignore the notes, or you don't even look at the note. I don't know what else to do. So the only solution I can think of is that you have to go to bed earlier. And then he goes, no. Can I leave the stair lights on then? And then that's when I was like, what? What does that have to do with remembering to turn the lights off? And he's like, yeah, if I could just keep the stair lights on, then I'll turn the lights off. And then it was like, oh my gosh. For once, it actually was anxiety, and I was thinking it's ADHD. I thought he just wasn't remembering, but he was, like, purposely not doing it because he was too scared. It was like the house was too dark, and he had to go up the stairs. And lately I've been keeping the stair lights off. So there is a light at the top of the stairs, but that apparently is not helpful enough. So totally missed that and was treating it. And so it's the frustration of treating it either in practical terms or in maybe ADHD terms, and it not working. So that's one example. Another one recently, well, this wasn't too recent, this was like in the last few months, is my daughter has body-focused repetitive behaviors along with anxiety and OCD. So that's BFRBs. Those are like your skin picking, your hair pulling. Those are comorbid conditions to anxiety or OCD, but they are not anxiety or OCD. I have podcasts on that if you want to dive into that topic. Actually, in looking, I don't have a topic. I have episode 62 is how to help a child who pulls hair or picks skin. I did an interview with Anila and Ellen from Habit Aware and the Keen bracelet. You can check out that. If you go to my website at atparentingsurvivalschool.com and scroll all the way down, if you're on a desktop, and if not, just go to the menu button and go to the search feature at the very bottom of the page. You can type in BFRB and that episode will pop up for you. I also have a couple of YouTube videos on that as well. But I should do a topic on why BFRBs are not OCD and why you shouldn't treat them as such. Interesting. Okay, well, there's a podcast idea. Stay tuned for that. But anyway, she was picking her feet, and we have this thing where I don't tell her not to pick. Apparently, that's not helpful. You'll hear in that interview episode, whatever that was, like 60 something. So it must have been really, really old because I'm on, this is episode 379. So you can imagine, and I do one a week. So that's episode 62. So that was years and years ago. I learned from Anila at Habit Aware that telling them not to pick is not the helpful thing to do. A good book, if you have a child who has picking, is When Bad Habits Take Hold by Don Huebner. I really like that book. You can also go to bfrb.org. It's a good resource. And habitaware.com is a great resource as well. They have like support groups for kids. My daughter was part of that. I just wanted to double check that for you. I want to make sure that's the right address. Yeah, if you go to Habit Aware, so it's habit and then aware.com, and go to their... If you go to Beyond Keen 2 at the very top, they have, I think, like family resources, and then they do have support groups and stuff. They have a hangout. It really isn't a support group. It's a hangout where they kind of like do fun things, but they're all kids who have BFRBs. So, and it's free, super cool. So there's just an extra resource for you. Anyway, total tangent. But my daughter is... Normally when she's picking, and I notice that we have this agreement that I will say something like, do you want some socks? And I have a chair in my living room that has like an arm that opens up, and like you can put like, controllers and stuff, magazines in there. And I just keep a bunch of socks. And so if I see her picking, I'll say, hey, do you want some socks? And then she'll say yes or no. Most of the time she says yes. And then I'll like throw them at her. Or I might just throw a pair of socks at her. And not say anything, but just offer her a pair of socks. And lately, this was a few months ago, she was saying things like, I love you. And I'm just sitting there, like in my chair, and she's sitting on the couch, and she's like, I love you. And I'm like, I love you too. And then a few minutes later, I love you. And I'm like, I love you too. And then I noticed this was happening more and more, where she would just like randomly say, I love you. Now, I have seen that with other kids where it's a compulsion. They're having an intrusive thought, like a negative thought about you, sometimes with moral OCD, or even like relationship OCD, and they'll want to like negate it by saying, I love you. And so it's actually a compulsion. And so you're like, my child's like the most loving thing on earth all of a sudden. Might be a red flag. It may not be, but it might be. And so eventually, maybe the third day of her doing this, I was like, I love you too. And then she was like, Mom, tell me not to pick. And I was like, how is that related to I love you? And it was becoming a compulsion. And like a lot of times we think that these comorbid conditions stay in their lane, but OCD is like greedy, and it will hijack other comorbid conditions like ADHD, body-focused repetitive behaviors, anxiety, whatever you have, and medical conditions, health conditions like allergies or migraines, and it can make compulsions around them. And so it like misophonia is another one. It smushes it together. And so her OCD kind of hijacked her BFRB and said, the only way you can stop picking is if your mom tells you to stop picking. And so my helpful approach of, hey, do you want some socks? OCD turned it into a compulsion. And so she couldn't stop. She was waiting to stop. And that's why she was saying, I love you. She wanted me to notice her. And the only reason why I figured that out was because she literally told me. So there was no incredible, insightful aha moment on my end. She literally was like, Mom, you need to say, I'm saying I love you so you can notice that I'm picking. And I was like, okay, if I notice you're picking, what does that have to do with anything? I need you to say stop picking. And I'm like, well, can't you just stop picking on your own? No, I need you to say it. So then I was like, oh my gosh, this is very compulsive. So those are just two examples of many, many, many in my world where it was an anxiety or OCD issue in disguise, sometimes in disguise of behavior that I thought was just kid behavior. I've had times where my son would get really oppositional. Actually, two instances where my kids got really oppositional, and it was because of anxiety or OCD. One, my daughter was getting very nasty about doing the dishes, and that I didn't realize she had discussed OCD themes. That was kind of like the way that I found out about that was she normally would do the dishes just fine, and all of a sudden, huge meltdowns. My son, when he was really little, I've used this example a lot, was having a huge meltdown about taking the trash out. That was his chore, and it was like he had to go and get the little trash cans around the house. And he was like, went ballistic. And it turned out he didn't want to go into dark closets and dark rooms, even during the day. So once we addressed that, the opposition went away. And then we made that more of an exposure and not a chore, because you don't want to do chores that are exposures, right? Those are two separate things. So it's not that they get a full pass. It just means you're going to approach it in a different way. Some things that can make these things worse, as far as them hiding anxiety or OCD issues, is when you ask them directly, is this your OCD? Sometimes that can make them even more defensive. If they're concealing it because they're ashamed, or they don't want to talk about anxiety or OCD, or they want you to continue accommodating, right? Those are three of the main issues that I brought up as far as why kids do this. You asking them directly is going to make them double down and dig their heels in often, right? Maybe they'll say yes, but often kids are going to be like, they're going to double down and they're going to be like, no, you think everything's anxiety or OCD. And so you're going to sometimes get a big reaction because of that. So I don't always recommend asking directly, is this your anxiety or OCD? I feel like that can put kids on the defensive. The other thing that you might want to avoid is saying, if this is your anxiety or OCD, I'm not going to do it. Or if this is your anxiety or OCD, and then telling them that you're not going to accommodate it. That also will make them double down on how this is not anxiety or OCD. So we have to be a little bit more shifty about this. I think sometimes we can parent like a bull in a china shop, and it's like we have to be more delicate. We have to be more intentional. We have to play chess and not checkers when it comes to this, because we have to be able to recognize, this is my move, and then what's the next move going to be, and what's the next move? What's the ripple effect of me doing this? And so how we speak to our kids and how we unravel these things and how we address them has to be done in a very savvy, sophisticated sort of way. And we'll talk about how to do that after the break.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
there's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers. And so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this like third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of like holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was like the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do like the exposures. Before it was like really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it. So it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com.
Welcome back. Okay, so in the first half of the episode, I was talking to you about why kids struggle with being transparent with their anxiety or OCD. Why do they hide it? We talked about a lot of reasons why. I gave you some really concrete reasons, examples of what was happening in my home. Some early tips on maybe what to avoid so that you don't get further shutdown or further denial. But then what else do we do? How do we figure out if it's anxiety or OCD? Well, I think the first step is pay attention and think like a detective. If your child is doing something out of the norm, right? So my daughter was saying, I love you all the time. And even though that isn't like obsessively washing her hands, it was uncharacteristic for her. So look for things that are new, that are uncharacteristic, or that are odd, right? I notice they always have to sit on the right side of the car. They say that that's their favorite side, but they get really, really angry when someone sits there. That's a bit odd. That's a bit new. What's going on there, right? I feel like we always have to look at parenting through two lenses when we're parenting anxiety and OCD, because we have to look through the typical parenting lens, and then there's an extra lens that we have to look through and say, in the lens of anxiety or OCD, what's going on here? And yeah, we could get a bit lazy and just say, is that anxiety or OCD? Or do you not want to sit there because of your anxiety or OCD? And that's a bull in a china shop kind of response. Instead, we want to hold back and look at patterns. So the first step is paying attention. So I noticed with my daughter, she's saying, I love you. And even though we say I love you a lot, it was very excessive in a short period of time. What's going on with that? Pay attention to patterns. I noticed that the lights were always left on every single day. And so you might initially respond with a solution. And so with my daughter, she said, I love you. And I said, I love you back. And then she rapidly said, I love you again. Like it didn't really help. So I gave a solution, or response, because it's not really a solution in this case, but I responded to it. And that didn't seem to, the response still seemed odd and off, right? With my son, I concluded he can't focus. This must be because he can't focus. You might conclude it is their ADHD, or you might conclude it is difficult behavior, or you might conclude this is their laziness, or whatever it is, right? So sometimes we come to conclusions after paying attention and being a detective, and then we give them solutions. And so in this case, I was like, aha, I'm so clever. I read a book. I'll write a little note to him to remind him. And then it didn't work. And it didn't work again. And it didn't work again. There were multiple times. And so when you're offering a solution and it's not satisfying the issue, right? So if it's difficult behavior, you threaten them perhaps, or you tell them if you don't do this, then you can't do that, and they don't seem to care, or they dig their heels in deeper, or they are afraid to do something, but they're saying that they're bored or whatever, and you give them a solution, and it's a really good practical solution, and then they come up with another excuse, right? So I always think when people are lying, they will give you multiple excuses. So like if you don't want to go somewhere and you're telling someone, hey, I can't make it to that party, I'm so sorry. And you give them three reasons why. I'm really tired, and tomorrow I have to get up early to go, the kids go to school. And also I'm not feeling 100%. To me, that's a red flag because people who actually are telling the truth don't need to give you 3 different reasons why. Just FYI. And so when they're overselling it. So when your kids are overselling it, or now they're coming up with a new reason, it's a bigger red flag, right? So we're starting to notice these patterns of, I tried to solve it in a practical, rational way that didn't seem to land well, or I tried to treat this like it was behavior and that didn't seem to land well. I've given lots of different solutions. I solved the problem that they were presenting to me, and then they came up with a new problem. So it's sticky. So when you notice that, then it might be time for questions. And so with my kids, I didn't really ever conclude that it was anxiety or OCD. So sometimes this might happen naturally, where with my son, I did approach it in a very problem-solving, rational sort of way. And then there was a punitive consequence when it wasn't working, where I said, you're going to have to go to bed when I go to bed because I can't trust that you're going to turn the lights off. And that's when I got the window, because there was a desperation of, well, I don't want to have to go to bed when my mom goes to bed. And so he came up with a solution that was addressing the actual problem, which was the fear. I wasn't addressing the fear, I was addressing the focus. And so once he highlighted, this is the solution, then I was like, duh, Natasha. Same thing with my daughter. I never really recognized it. So this can happen to you too. And that's okay. But I never recognized it either until I wasn't doing what she wanted. I wasn't giving into the compulsion. She was leading breadcrumbs to give into the compulsion. I was not recognizing it. I wasn't falling for the trap. And so then she had to literally say, tell me not to pick. And that's when, so I guess there was a little bit of an aha with both of those. When she said, tell me not to pick, I was like, okay, that's a weird response. And then, the light bulb moment. And when my son said, if I can keep the stair lights on, then I'll turn the lights off. That was a light bulb moment. Those were really overt though. You might be able to discover these things sooner. And I have lots of examples where I have caught it a lot sooner. I just like to share with you my worst moments because why not? Just to really highlight how we can miss these things. So when you do notice it, and you've watched for patterns, maybe you've tried to solve it, then ask your kids directly and say something like, I noticed that you were having a hard time when, or I noticed that you always have to sit in the right side of the car. And I also noticed that you get really, really angry and upset when someone else sits there. And I wonder what's the hardest part if someone else were to sit there, right? So I'm always about what's the hardest part. You could also, let me back up. Depending on what it is, you could do some experiments briefly, right? Not to torment your kids, but if you're not sure if it's anxiety or OCD, you can kind of poke the bear a little bit and see how they react. And so if they just say, I prefer the red cup, or I just really prefer to sit there, it's just a habit, then, maybe you put your bag on that seat and you change up the scenario and you see the reaction. And when there's big reactions over small things, it's an indication you're missing something more often than not. So that might be something. With my daughter with the discuss theme, I didn't know if it was behavior and entitlement that she couldn't do the dishes all of a sudden, or if she was really struggling. And so a lot of it was hair and so I did some experiments. I left hair in my sink, where normally I would clean it out, and I'd see, could she brush her teeth with the hair there? So we did a little bit of experimenting, and it became clear very quickly that she was struggling and it was a genuine reaction. She was gagging. She was obviously in distress. And then we moved into working on it, doing exposures. The positive side of that is, well, what we actually wound up doing is for a while, she wouldn't have that as her chore. She'd have to go do something else. And then we moved into her doing it as an exposure. But we started with, I would clean the entire sink and clean all of the dishes. And so they were just basically like rinsed off, pretty clean dishes, but without like soap or whatever. And all she had to do was put it in the dishwasher. And even that was hard for her. And then I would, over time, I'd put a little bit of food in there. Well, fast forward, that was probably a year and a half ago. I had elbow surgery last week and was unable to do the dishes, unable to do a lot of stuff. And all the kids had to step up. And we put it in rotation. Like, oh, you put in, you take out. And she volunteered. And the sink was disgusting because I'm not rinsing things off. I'm not, able to really keep on top of things. And she has had zero problem doing the dishes. So one of the things that we did do, this is a total side note, we bought, what I'm trying to think of the right word, gloves, dish gloves, because I did read a lot of interesting information about disgust OCD and how that you can give them something to be able to cope with the disgust different than you would with regular OCD, that it's not a compulsion or an accommodation, but just a way for them to get through their daily life and do things. It's actually really interesting. I did do a podcast on this because there is there has been a protocol approach for disgust OCD that Rich Gallagher created. No research really, to be honest, on it based on anything but his own experiences. But I did find it really interesting, and I did try this approach with her, and it did work. She still struggles, but she can do the dishes now without a problem. She just needs to wear dish gloves. If you're interested in that topic, check out episode 341 called Helping Kids with Disgust OCD Themes. And I go into his approach and my thoughts on all of that and the slippery slope that you have to be careful about. But you might find that to be an interesting listen as well. So explore with your child what's the hardest part of. And then if they do kind of reveal, sometimes I think in the answer, when kids say, when you ask them, what's the hardest part about turning the light off? I think for my son, he probably would have said, I forget. Like he would have honestly used that as an excuse. I had to go through the steps of problem solving. And then I wasn't trying to be punitive, but it was a natural consequence that this is what's going to happen, to almost corner him to the point where he had to problem solve for himself. So asking what's the hardest part of isn't going to always get you where you want to get. It's just part of it. It's just a component to find out more. And a lot of times if they are doing something or they are not doing something and they say, this is not anxiety or OCD. I know you're trying to say it's anxiety or OCD. Sometimes what I would say to my kids is, if it's not anxiety or OCD, then it really wouldn't matter if I put my bag on the right side of the car, just to use that example. So let's just play a game where for the next 3 days, I put my bag on the car seat. And if they're like, no, you can't do that. I'm like, well, this is a pretty big reaction for someone who says it's just a habit or it's a routine. And so sometimes pushing it a little bit, especially if we're involved in it, like nobody can sit on that seat. It's not just in their world, it's impacting everybody's world. Either they want other people to follow the rule or they want you to actively do something. And so another way to kind of push the envelope is to say, well, if it's not anxiety or OCD, then it really wouldn't matter or wouldn't be too hard for you to play this game with me where you don't do it for the next 3 days. Or you do it for the next 3 days, depending on if it's an avoidance situation versus a compulsion. And sometimes that can foster some conversation. The hard part is you don't want to instantly go into therapy mode. So if they finally say, yes, I am worried that that's contaminated, or yeah, I need you to say, stop picking, otherwise I can't stop picking, or I am like afraid of the dark, that is not the time to jump in and say, I knew it. I knew this was anxiety or OCD, and now we need to work on it. And so, and then you move right into therapy mode where you are talking about resisting the compulsion or pulling back the accommodation. Don't do that. Don't do any of that. It is so hard, but we have to wait for the right time to discuss these things. The reason why they didn't want to tell us is for that very reason. They don't want us to therapize them. I don't know if that's a word, but you know what I mean, right? They don't want us to go into therapy mode. So don't do it in that moment. Validate that was hard for them to tell you. I appreciate you being honest. I really feel like I wish that you can come to me whenever you're struggling, when it's anxiety or OCD. And I'll never force you to do anything. I just want you to feel like you can come and trust me and tell me. I'm here to support you. This is your journey. It's not mine. And I'm like your partner in this. You don't have to carry the full weight. I'm here to support you. And leave it at that, right? Because we don't want to confirm their worst beliefs that this is going to get uncomfortable for them. We want to leave it at that. When my son said, I'm afraid of the lights and stuff, I wasn't like, we need to do exposures. Or we can't turn on that light. That's an accommodation. I didn't do that. I was just like, okay, thank you for letting me know, right? It's filed away, that we've still got like a dark fear and we need to work on that and those issues. But that wasn't the moment to start developing a plan. You want to give it some space, and then you want to kind of file it away and be like, okay, these are all the themes that she's dealing with, right? So, you might say, okay, well, she can't, no one can touch the back right side of the car. And I also noticed that no one can touch her backpack. And I also noticed that this can happen. And so you add that. And then when you're working on anxiety or OCD, you address it as a theme or as a whole. But you want to give it space, and you don't want to directly link it to, you couldn't go upstairs without turning the light on, or you couldn't, handle me having my backpack in the back. Because when we let them know that we just took all the information that you shared with me that you were nervous about sharing, and I've turned it now into a therapy weapon, they're going to maybe not trust you moving forward, or they'll be confirmed that they should have kept that to themselves. So super hard and slippery stuff to gather information, observe patterns, add it to your file, whether mentally or literally you write it down, and then start to notice the big themes around these things. And the more you notice, especially the things that involve you or involve rules around the family, the more you can catch those, the better, because we don't want anxiety or OCD to impact or have a bigger impact on the family system than it already does. And that is the one thing that we can control, is what we contribute to the anxiety or OCD. Do we create this warm, welcoming environment for anxiety or OCD where it can hide and grow and fester and hijack the entire family? Or do we have a therapeutic home environment where it can't hide, it can't grow, it's uncomfortable, we can see it, it's transparent? That's the kind of environment ideally we want. It won't always be completely transparent because kids will keep things to themselves, but is it rippling into the family dynamic and the family culture and the family environment? That we can try to contain. And that's what I hope this episode helps you with, is being aware of those ripples, because you'll never fully know what is going on in your child's mind or how many compulsions they're having. They might be able to hide those. But when it starts to impact family members, that's what we need to know about. So I hope that you found that helpful. I hope that you enjoy my podcast in general. If you are, don't forget to rate it. I always appreciate that. It does help the show. So click a star wherever you consume your podcasts. If you have a few extra minutes and can write a review, I greatly appreciate that. I always try to show my gratitude by reading one of them. It had been like a long time. I was like not getting any reviews for a while. You guys are normally so good at writing reviews. And then I've gotten a couple. So I do want to thank Team Panic, I like your name, for writing a review. They wrote, "Not alone. Natasha's podcasts have helped me feel less alone. Her videos aimed at kids have been so helpful when my kids have a particular hurdle or stumbling block. They are short and sweet, and my kids don't roll their eyes at them." That's nice. I'm glad they don't. And she's managed to address challenges that may seem very specific and unique. This also helps my kids know that A, mom isn't making this up, and B, they're not alone. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for writing that. She is talking about my YouTube channel. So if you are looking for YouTube videos for your kids, you can go to natashadaniels.com/@Natasha Daniels OCD therapist. Let me check that. Actually, I don't know what I was talking about. If you go to natashadaniels.com/YouTube, it will take you directly to my YouTube channel. It's a short link to take you there. My username is @NatashaDaniels OCD Therapist on YouTube. So you can also search for that, but I've been trying to make things easier for you guys. So there is a search feature on my YouTube channel. There's a little magnifying glass on the channel. If you search that and not all of YouTube, you can search my videos, and I have literally videos. I've been doing this. This channel's been around since I think 2017, maybe. Actually, 2015, I just looked. That's crazy. So there are a lot of videos on there. So feel free to check that out. And I appreciate that your child's watching the videos and not rolling their eyes. That is absolutely my purpose, is I want them to be short and sweet. And I try to do topics that I know kids think that they're the only ones, because I feel like normalizing someone's experience is really half the battle. Because when they realize, oh my gosh, there is something called moral OCD and other people worry about being a bad person. Or there's something called harm OCD and people actually do worry about harming themselves or other people. I'm not alone. And my mom's not crazy. And I'm not crazy. So I love that review. Thank you for that. If you write a review, maybe I'll be reading your review next time. And don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do. And I'll talk to you again next Thursday. Nope, next Tuesday. My YouTubes come out on Thursday. My podcasts come out on Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.